Before we begin today's story, we want to take a moment to thank every single person who has supported Paws and Whispers. Your kindness means more than words can say. We are still fighting to keep these stories alive, and every bit of support brings us one step closer. If you'd like to help too, the link is in the first pinned comment. What Callan saw the first afternoon: a grey cat sitting beside the old oil drum near the garage door, eyes forward, not looking at him. What the cat did: noted the man in the doorway, held still, did not leave. The garage had been Callan Rourke's primary occupation for 11 years, in the way that certain places become occupations rather than simply locations, the way a person stops going to a place and starts being there instead. It sat at the edge of a gravel lot on the south end of Calder's Crossing, Vermont, a town small enough that its one intersection was considered downtown and its one diner, Pell's, kept the same hours it had kept since 1974. The garage bore no sign with Callan's name. It did not need one. People in Calder's Crossing had known his name before the garage existed, and they knew it better now, though knowing it and stopping to talk were two different things, and most of them respected the difference. The garage smelled of iron and oil and cold concrete. In October, the cold came in through the gap under the roll-up door, whether Callan sealed it or not, and the single space heater in the corner ran all day and improved the situation only slightly. He did not mind the cold. Cold had a quality he appreciated. It required no response. It was simply there, asking nothing, and you either dressed for it or you didn't, and either way, it continued. He had moved to Calder's Crossing 11 years ago, in the kind of move that is not chosen so much as arrived at, a calculation made from what remained after something large was subtracted. He had grown up in Burlington, had worked as a mechanic there through his 20s and 30s, had been married for 7 years to a woman named Dina, who had been precise and warm, and who had, in the way of people who are both those things, made him better at being precise and allowed him to be less afraid of being warm. When she died, quickly, in the way that is called merciful by people who were not there, he had finished the lease on the apartment, packed what mattered into his truck, and driven south and east until Calder's Crossing appeared at the end of a county road, in the way that small towns sometimes appear, without announcement, without obvious reason, simply there. He had rented the garage space, then he had bought it. He had not done much else. What the cat saw the first afternoon: a man in a grey work jacket standing in the roll-up door with a wrench in his hand, not moving. What the cat did: waited. Already knew how to wait. The oil drum sat at the south corner of the lot, where Callan stacked things he had not yet decided what to do with: a cracked rim, a battery casing, 2 lengths of exhaust pipe he'd pulled from a Ford pickup 3 months ago. The drum had been there when he arrived and had absorbed 11 years of secondary purpose without complaint. The cat, when Callan first noticed him, was sitting on the flat ground beside it, with his tail wrapped around his front paws and his eyes directed at the road, not at Callan, not at the garage, not at anything specific. The road itself, the stretch of County 2-lane that ran past the lot and curved south toward the ridge. Callan noticed him the way you notice something that fits too well into a place, not because it stands out, but because it belongs there so thoroughly that you cannot remember afterward a time when it wasn't. He did not say anything. He went back to work. What Callan saw the second afternoon: the same cat in the same position beside the oil drum. What the cat did: turned his head and looked at Callan for 3 full seconds, then looked back at the road. The second afternoon, Callan set a cracked plastic bowl of water beside the drum before he went in for the evening. He did not examine why he did this. It was the kind of thing you did for an animal that appeared to be staying somewhere, not an invitation, a provision. The difference mattered to him, though he would not have been able to say precisely why. The third afternoon, the bowl was empty. The cat was in the same position. Callan filled the bowl. He noticed that third evening what he had not quite registered before. The cat, when Callan came within 10 feet of him, did not move or flinch or perform any of the gestures that an uncertain animal produces. He simply tracked Callan with his eyes, with the measured attention of something that had already taken full account of the situation and was not alarmed by any of it. It was not the attention of a hungry animal watching a food source. It was more like, and Callan turned this over while he cleaned his tools at the end of the day, the attention of someone who had arrived somewhere specific and was waiting for the person who was supposed to be there to catch up. He left water the fourth day without deciding to, which was how most of his decisions got made anymore. What the cat saw, the third afternoon, the man setting a bowl of water by the drum, moving without ceremony, not lingering. What the cat did, waited until the man was back inside, drank. On the fifth day, the cat was not by the oil drum. Colin noticed this while pulling up the roll-up door at 7:15, and the noticing had a particular texture, a blank moment, a missing, the way you reach for something in a pocket and find the pocket empty, and your hand pauses there for a second without knowing why. He scanned the lot, the road, the strip of weedy ground along the lot's south fence. Nothing. He started work. 40 minutes later, he looked up from a brake assembly and found the cat sitting inside the garage, 4 feet from the workbench, watching him, not exploring, not investigating the corners or sniffing at the equipment or doing any of the things an animal does in a new space, simply sitting with the same composed attention as though he had assessed the garage from the outside for 4 days and found it acceptable and was now confirming this assessment from a closer distance. Colin put down his socket wrench. "You got a home?" he said. The cat looked at him. "I figured not," Callan said. He picked up the wrench and went back to work. The cat stayed. After a while, he moved to a position closer to the workbench, not underfoot, not in the way, but close enough that Callan was aware of him at every moment, just inside the edge of awareness, just there. At the end of the day, when Callan reached for the roll-up door to bring it down, the cat walked out first. Clean, self-directed, unhurried. He crossed the lot, sat beside the oil drum, and looked at the road. Callan pulled the door down. He stood on the inside for a moment, with his hand on the strap, looking at nothing in particular. Then he went to lock up. What Callan saw, 1 week in, a grey cat that appeared every morning beside the oil drum, came into the garage in the afternoon and left before dark. Always at the same time, always to the same position, always looking at the road. What the cat did, watched the road at 4:15 every afternoon with a quality of attention that was unlike his attention at any other time. Still and particular, focused outward rather than inward, as if the road owed him something or was about to deliver something and he intended not to miss it. What Callan did not yet understand, that the cat was not watching for something to come. He was watching the exact hour when something had stopped coming, Uchase. He had not intended to name him. Naming an animal that was not yours was a form of presumption he had always found slightly embarrassing, the kind of thing people did when they wanted to claim something without admitting they were claiming it. He had told himself the cat was simply using the lot as a waypoint, that it probably had an owner somewhere in Calder's Crossing, that it would disappear as unremarkably as it had appeared. It did not disappear. By the end of the second week, Callan had begun to call him Marlo, which was not a name he chose so much as one that arrived. It had a heaviness to it that matched the cat's bearing, a weight without drama, and it was short enough to use without feeling like a declaration. He did not say the name out loud at first. He thought it. Then one afternoon, without planning to, he said it, Marlo, just once, checking the brake assembly. The cat, sitting 4 feet away, turned his head. Callan looked at him. The cat looked back. "All right," Callan said. And that was that. What the cat saw, 2 weeks in, a man who worked with his hands the way some people pray, with concentration and repetition and a quality of being fully present that was absent from the rest of his life. A man whose garage was orderly and whose house, which the cat had not yet entered, was not. A man who spoke to no one all day and said very little to the cat, and whose voice, when he used it, was low and careful, as though words were something that needed to be spent with discretion. What the cat did, moved his afternoon position 3 feet closer to the workbench, not to the man, to the bench, where the work happened, or the pattern that Callan noticed, and he was a precise man, as precise in observing as he was in the physical mechanics of his trade, was this. Every afternoon at 4:15, Marlo stopped whatever he was doing and moved to the same position. If he was inside the garage, he went to the roll-up door and sat facing it. If he was outside by the oil drum, he turned toward the road. He stayed in that position for 11 to 15 minutes. Then he relaxed. Something in his posture softened, the set of his shoulders changed, and went back to whatever he had been doing before. Callan started checking his watch at 4:15. He was not sure what he was tracking, only that it mattered to track it. That the precision of the behavior meant something, even if he did not know what. On the 16th day, he sat on an overturned crate at 4:15 and watched. Marlo was at the roll-up door, which Callan had left half-raised. The cat sat in the strip of grey afternoon light and looked out at the road. The October cold came in under the door and moved along the concrete floor in the particular way of Vermont cold in the turning season, not yet brutal, but honest. The oak at the corner of the lot had gone deep red 2 weeks ago and was now releasing its leaves in the wind that came through the gap. One leaf drifted in through the door and settled 2 feet to Marlo's left. He did not look at it. He looked at the road. At 4:24, something in him changed. Callan saw it, the slight release of held attention, the settling of the body weight from alert to resting. Marlo turned from the road and walked back toward the workbench and sat down and began to clean his face. Callan looked at the time. He said nothing. He went back to work. But that night, driving home through the dark county road that ran from the garage to the house he had bought for its distance from everything else, he thought about what it meant to wait at the same time every day for something that was not going to come. He thought about the kind of waiting that was not hope, but practice, a way of marking time at the place where time had stopped. He thought, that cat has been someone's. So, what the cat did, the 17th day, entered the house. Not through a window, not through a gap. The mudroom door at the back of the house was on a hydraulic hinge that had been failing for 2 years. Callan had replaced the mechanism twice, and the door still drifted open in wind, if not latched properly. He had latched it that morning. He had not latched it well enough. He found Marlo in the kitchen when he came home at 6. The cat was sitting at the far end of the kitchen table, which was bare except for a single set of salt and pepper shakers and a stack of mail that had been accumulating for 3 weeks because Callan did not open mail unless it had a deadline. Marlo was not on the table. He was on the floor beside it, sitting with the same composure as always, looking toward the hallway that led to the back of the house. Callan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the cat. "How did you get in here?" he said. Marlo looked at him briefly, then looked back toward the hallway. Callan checked the mudroom door. The latch had slipped. He secured it properly. When he returned to the kitchen, Marlo was still at the end of the hallway, looking at the closed door at its far end. The door that Callan had not opened in 4 years. What the cat saw, a door that the man never touched. That had no light under it in the evenings, that no movement came from or went to. A door the man walked past 3, 4, 5 times a night on his way from the kitchen to the bedroom, always with the same slight change in his walking, a contained, controlled alteration of pace, like a driver slowing before a curve they know is coming. That said more about what was behind the door than any open room could. What the cat did, sat in front of it, did not scratch, did not cry, put one paw lightly against the wood, and stayed. It stayed. The closed door had been closed since the November 4 years ago, when Callan had packed the contents of the room into boxes, not throwing anything away, not donating anything, not doing any of the things that the people around him had carefully suggested he do. And had stacked those boxes in the room itself, and closed the door, and applied to the door the same principle he applied to most things that had no repair. He left it alone. He maintained the rest of the house. He kept the kitchen orderly and the bedroom functional and the garage immaculate. He did not think about the room at the end of the hall. He had been doing this for 4 years with the discipline of a person who has learned that certain things are managed by not being touched. Marlo sat in front of that door every night for the first week he was in the house. Callan walked past him, fixed supper, worked at the kitchen table, went to bed. He was aware of the cat at the end of the hall, the way you are aware of an alarm you have not yet decided whether to turn off, a presence at the edge of attention that you choose, consciously and repeatedly, to not address. The second week, he began saying "move" when he walked past. Marlo moved, then sat back down when Callan had passed. What Callan saw, the third week of Marlo being in the house, that the cat had found two things in the house. One was the south-facing window seat in the front room, where he slept in the afternoons in the low autumn light. The other was the door. He alternated between these two locations with an economy that Callan found, if he was honest, admirable. He did not waste time anywhere else. He went where the light was, and he went where the door was, and everything else in the house was simply the geography between those 2 points. What the cat did, day 19 of being in the house, sat in front of the door for 2 hours. Colin worked at the kitchen table all evening, and at 9 o'clock got up and walked to the hallway and stood there. Marlo did not move. Callan stood at the far end of the hallway and looked at the door. The door was painted white, the same flat white as the rest of the hall, and it had a round brass knob with a scratch along the top that Callan had never gotten around to polishing out. He stood with his arms at his sides, and he looked at that scratch, and he felt something shift in him, in the way that things shift when you have been holding them still for a long time, and the muscles finally begin to shake. He went back to the kitchen. He sat down. He said to the kitchen, "Not yet," and Marlo, at the end of the hall, waited. "Mum, It was Elowyn Price who noticed everything, because Elowyn Price had always been the kind of person who noticed everything about everyone and had spent 31 years making something useful of it. She had been a teacher at Calder's Crossing Elementary for 3 decades, 4th grade for 24 of those years, a run that had given her, according to her own estimate, a professional relationship with roughly 2/3 of the town's adults under 55. She knew who had struggled with long division and who had been a natural at it. She knew whose mother had packed them lunches with the sandwich cut in triangles and whose had sent them with money for the hot plate. She knew the specific way a child looked when something was wrong at home, which was a look she had gotten very good at reading, because the children who most needed reading were the ones who worked hardest at not showing anything. She was 67 now, and retired and living in the White Cape across the street from Callan Rourke's house, where she had lived for 22 years. She had a daughter in Portland, Oregon, and a son in Montpelier, and she talked to them both weekly with the devoted regularity of a woman who understood the telephone as an instrument of maintenance, not repair. She had friends in town. She took her walks at 7 in the morning and again at 5 in the afternoon, in the habit she had built in retirement to give her days a shape, because shape, she had found, was the thing you most needed to manufacture when no one was requiring it of you anymore. She had been watching Callan Rourke's house across the street for years with the unhurried attention she gave to most things that interested her. She watched the light in the garage window stay on past midnight in the early years and then gradually settle to a more reasonable hour. She watched the small garden beside the front steps go through stages, neglected, then cleared, then neglected again. She watched the truck in the driveway through the seasons, the snow piling up on it in winter, the mud that came in spring when the road thawed. She had never crossed the street to speak to him. He had made it comprehensively clear over 11 years that crossing the street to speak to him was not a thing that would be welcome. She respected that. She had 31 years of experience with the difference between a person who needs quiet and a person who needs to be left alone, and Callan Rourke was the second kind, and she understood the second kind, even if she did not stop watching. When the grey cat appeared in the lot by the garage, she noticed within the first week. She noticed, specifically, 2 things: that the cat appeared at the same time each afternoon and occupied the same position each time, and that Callan, by the second week, had begun setting out water. Setting out water was not a large gesture, but Elowyn had been watching Callan Rourke for 11 years, during which time she had never once seen him make a gesture toward anything outside his own necessary perimeter, and water in a cracked bowl beside an oil drum was, from a certain distance and with a certain kind of attention, significant. She did not cross the street. She made tea, and she stood at her kitchen window, and she watched. Wamamasan E. The shelter was run by Tamsin Vale, who had been running it for 16 years with the specific combination of warmth and inflexibility that animal rescue tends to produce in its most effective practitioners. The Calder's Crossing Animal Shelter was located on the north end of Birch Street in a converted barn that smelled of cedar chips and clean laundry and the particular earthy warmth of many animals in a heated space. Tamsin was 52, with short grey-streaked hair she kept very close to her head, and the direct manner of a person whose entire professional life required making fast assessments of complex situations and acting on them before they worsened. She had found Marlo's previous intake record after 3 days of searching her own files, which were thorough and which she kept in a specific order that other people found confusing and which she found obvious. He had been surrendered 18 months ago by an elderly man from Harwich named Otis Fenn, who had brought him in with a carrier lined in old flannel and a sheet of paper with Marlo's feeding times and dietary preferences written out in the careful long hand of someone who had been keeping these records for years. The note said Marlo was 9 years old, that he did not like sudden sounds, that he had, for the entirety of his life, been accustomed to a routine involving a person who left the house at 4:15 every afternoon and returned before dark. Otis Fenn had written, "He waits for me at the door." Below that, in handwriting that was less steady than the rest, "I can no longer return to him." Tamsin had read the note when it came in and had put it in the file and had done what she always did with the information that accompanied surrendered animals. She filed it. It was data. It informed care. It did not change the necessity of the outcome, which was placement, because the shelter had 32 animals and 16 runs and the capacity to hold each animal for a defined period before reassignment became a welfare issue rather than a preference. She had not placed Marlo. She had tried twice. The first potential adopter, a woman from Middlebury, had brought her daughter, who had wanted a kitten and had made this clear in tones audible through the door of the meeting room. The second had been a retired couple who wanted a cat primarily for their adult children's visits and whose energy, bright, fast-talking, reaching for the cat before he had had time to establish that he was willing to be reached for, had caused Marlo to retreat to the back of the run and sit facing the wall for 40 minutes after they left. She had not tried a third time. Then, Callan Rourke had walked in with Marlo in a carrier and set the carrier on the intake counter and said, without preamble, "I found this cat. He's been at my garage. I can't keep him." Tamsin had looked at the carrier. She had looked at Callan. She had seen something she recognized, and she had kept it to herself, which was the thing she was best at. "We'll take him," she said. "There's paperwork." What the cat saw, the day Callan brought him to the shelter, a room with a quality of controlled warmth, the smell of many animals, a woman with grey-streaked hair who approached without rushing and opened the carrier with practiced efficiency. Staff members at a distance, watching with professional attentiveness. What the cat did, stepped out of the carrier, walked past the open run doors, walked past the woman with the grey-streaked hair, turned and sat directly in front of Callan. Not anxious, not demanding, simply present. Here. This. The room went quiet in the specific way of rooms that have just witnessed something that does not fit any available category. Tamsin stood with the empty carrier in her hand and looked at the cat sitting at Callan's feet. One of her staff members, a young woman named Jo, was standing near the supply cabinet and had stopped moving entirely, holding a bag of cedar chips against her chest. Marlo did not look at Tamsin. He did not look at Jo. He looked at Callan with the patient, full attention of something that had made a clear choice and was waiting for the other party to catch up. "He does that," Callan said. His voice was level, informational. "I can see that," Tamsin said. Colin looked down at the cat. Something moved across his face that was gone before it could be identified. He turned and walked out through the shelter door without another word. The door closed. Tamsin looked at Marlo. Marlo looked at the door. What the cat did, waited 60 seconds, then stood up, walked to the shelter door, sat in front of it, did not scratch, did not cry, waited. Callan was in the parking lot, key in the door of his truck, when he heard the shelter door open. He turned. Tamsin was standing in the doorway with Marlo in her arms, not carried exactly, more held, the cat sitting upright against her forearm with his tail hanging loose, looking at the parking lot. Looking at the truck. "He hasn't moved from the door since you walked out," Tamsin said. "In 11 years of doing this, I have had cats go back to their kennel and I have had cats cry at the door. I have not had one sit in front of a closed door like they had an appointment on the other side. Colin looked at the cat. The cat looked at him. I can't keep a cat, Callan said. I work all day. The garage is no place for... Mr. Rourke, Tamsin said, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I observed. She set Marlo down on the walk. He crossed the parking lot, not running, not performing, simply walking at pace, and sat next to the rear tire of Callan's truck. Callan stood with his hand on the driver's door and looked at this for a long moment. I'll think about it, he said. He got in and drove away. What Callan found when he got home that evening, Marlo in the back seat of the truck. The carrier had been on the floor behind the passenger seat, door latched. The carrier door was open. The carrier was empty. He sat in the driveway with the engine off for a long time. Then he said, How did you do that? Marlo looked out the window. Callan got out of the truck, opened the rear door, and looked at the carrier. The latch mechanism was intact. There was no damage to the carrier, no visible explanation. He stood in the cooling October evening, looking at an empty carrier and a cat in his back seat, and he was aware, in the deep, rational part of himself that had kept his life running for 4 years through the application of precision and discipline, that this situation exceeded available explanation. He was also aware, in some quieter part of himself, that it didn't matter. Come on, he said. Marlo stepped out of the truck and walked to the house. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. YouTube has decided that our channel does not meet their requirements to be supported by their platform. We believe this is a mistake, and we are fighting it. But right now, the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever touched your heart, consider making a small donation. Even $1 helps us keep going. Just being here, watching and caring, already means the world to us. The donation link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you. Elowen Price, at her kitchen window, watched the truck pull in and watched the man get out and open the rear door and stand there looking at something. Then watched him close the door and walk toward the house with the grey cat at his side. She set down her tea. She had been a teacher for 31 years. She had watched enough people to know that what she had just seen was not a man bringing a cat home. It was something more specific than that. It was a man who had tried not to want something and had run out of try. She did not cross the street that evening, but she thought about it. The next 3 weeks established what Callan had not admitted he was establishing, a household. Not a warm household, not a transformed one, but a functioning arrangement between two creatures who had both, in their different ways, learned to operate within the minimum necessary. Marlo ate at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. He slept on the window seat and occasionally on the foot of Callan's bed, which Callan did not address. He accompanied Callan to the garage each morning and spent the day between the lot and the interior with the same unhurried rotation between positions. He went to the roll-up door at 4:15 and looked at the road. Colin began keeping that hour free. He told himself it was a coincidence of scheduling. The door at the end of the hallway, Marlo visited every evening without fail. By the end of the second week, Callan had stopped saying, "Move." He still did not open the door, but he stopped pretending the cat was not there. Then Tamsin called. "There's a family," she said, "from Burlington. They've been looking for an adult cat for 8 months. They have a 6-year-old daughter who lost her previous cat last spring. Their file is good. They're good people." Colin said nothing. "I'm not supposed to make this call," Tamsin said. "You haven't formally adopted him. You filled out the temporary hold paperwork, and that's it. I have 32 animals and limited capacity, and when a good family wants a specific animal, I have a responsibility." "He's been here," Callan said. "I know that," Tamsin said. "I'm calling because I know that. I'm giving you a week." She hung up. Colin put the phone down on the kitchen table. Marlo was at the end of the hallway, sitting in front of the closed door. His tail moved once, slowly, at the tip. The family arrived on a Saturday morning, 2 adults and a girl named Rin, who was 6 years old and had dark braids, and looked at Marlo with the uncomplicated intensity of a child who has been waiting for something specific. They met in the common room at the shelter, which smelled of cedar chips and the good coffee Tamsin kept for these occasions, and Tamsin set Marlo on the rug in the center of the room, and the family arranged themselves around the periphery. and waited. Rin knelt on the rug with her hands in her lap. "Hi," she whispered. Marlo looked at her. He was still for a moment. Then he turned and crossed the rug and jumped onto the bench beside Callan, who was sitting near the door with his arms crossed and a face that revealed nothing at all. He settled into the bench cushion, pressed his side against Callan's thigh, and put his chin on his front paws. The room was very quiet. The father cleared his throat. The mother looked at Tamsin. Rin looked at the cat on the bench and then at the man beside the cat and said, with the specific honesty of 6-year-olds, "That's not a cat that wants to leave." Callan looked down at Marlo. Marlo did not look up. Something shifted in Callan's face again. This time, it lasted a moment longer before it was gone. "She's not wrong," Tamsin said carefully. The father looked at Callan. "Do you want him?" he said. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, asked with the directness of a person who has driven 2 hours and would like to understand the situation clearly. Callan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know that I'm the right person." "He seems to think differently," the mother said, gently. Rin reached out and touched the bench cushion, an inch from Marlo's paw. Marlo looked at her hand. He did not move away. He simply looked at it with the steady consideration he brought to everything, then looked back at the man beside him. The meeting ended. The family drove back to Burlington. Tamsin walked Callan to the parking lot. "You have 4 days," she said. "Then the hold expires, and I have to move forward with the placement." He nodded and got in the truck. What Callan decided that night, that he would do what needed to be done. He could not be responsible for this animal. He did not have the equipment for it, not the practical equipment, though that could be acquired, but the internal one. He had built his life around the specific architecture of not losing things, which meant not having things that could be lost. It was a sound architecture. He believed in it. What he would do. Nothing this week. Maintain the status quo. When the 4 days were up, let the placement proceed. He went to bed. At 2 in the morning, he heard Marlo in the hallway. He lay in the dark and listened to the cat move from the window seat to the end of the hall. Settle, be still. He lay there a long time. Then he got up and walked to the hallway in the dark and stood at the kitchen end, looking down toward the closed door, where the grey shape of the cat was just visible in the faint light from the window. Marlo did not move. Callan stood there for a while. Something rose in him that he had not let rise in 4 years. He pushed it back down. He went back to bed. In the morning, he did not feed the cat. That's so. What the cat did, when the food bowl was not filled, waited, went to the garage, came back at 4:15, looked at the road, did not come to Callan, did not perform. Simply moved through the day at a slight and certain distance, the distance of something that understands a withdrawal and does not take it personally, only notes it. What Callan saw by the 3rd day of not feeding the cat and not speaking to him and maintaining what he had decided was the appropriate distance for an animal that was not his, that the house had acquired a quality it had not had before Marlo came, which was also not the quality it had had in the years before Marlo. It was neither the controlled silence of a house in use nor the held silence of a house in grief. It was a third thing, the silence of a house that had learned to breathe and had stopped again. He walked past the hallway door 3 times that evening. He stopped at it each time. He did not open it. Ilawan Price had been watching the garage for 3 weeks. In the intermittent and undramatic way she watched most things, not with intensity, but with the accumulated attention that produced, over time, a clear picture. She had watched the cat come and go. She had watched Callan's truck leave and return. She had watched the light in the garage and the light in the house and the small pattern of their relationship, which was the thing she was best at reading. Patterns. The pattern had changed in the last 3 days. She could see it in the way Callan moved between the house and garage. Something contracted, pulled in, the opposite of the slight loosening she had been observing since the cat's arrival. She could see it in the fact that the cat was spending more time outside and less time going in and out of the house with the easy, annexed quality he'd developed. She put on her coat. She crossed the street. She knocked. He opened the door with the expression of a man who was not expecting anyone and had no particular interest in whoever it turned out to be. "I'm Ilawan Price," she said. "I live across the street. I know you know that. Mam Ienti Iupai." I know, he said. I'm going to the town fair on Saturday, she said. They close Main Street and there's cider and there's music and half the town comes. Bring the cat. He looked at her. He'd like it, she said. People would like to meet him. He's been around town more than you know. Hazel at the bakery has been leaving water out for him on the north side of the building. The ladies from the church mentioned a grey cat that sat on the steps Tuesday mornings. She paused. He gets around. He doesn't leave the lot, Callan said. He does, Elowen said. Just not when you're watching. He went to the fair. He was not sure later how to account for this. He had not been to the Calder's Crossing Autumn Fair in 7 years. He had no interest in cider or low music or half the town. He brought Marlo on a leash that the cat tolerated, with the composed acceptance he brought to most things imposed on him, and he walked to the 2 blocks of closed Main Street and stood at the edge of it and felt immediately that this had been an error of judgment. Then something happened. Hazel Burge from the bakery, a stout woman in her 60s with flour on her sleeve and the quick eyes of someone who does not miss things, saw Marlo and said, "Oh, he's yours." Not a question. A completion. "He's not mine exactly," Callan started. "He sits outside the bakery every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, Hazel said. "Same spot, between the north wall and the bread shelf I keep outside. Like clockwork. Has done for, 8 months. More." She looked at the cat. He never wanted food, just sat there. From across the green, a woman Callan recognized as one of the church volunteers was walking toward them. "Is that the grey cat?" she said. "The one that comes on Tuesdays?" Hazel looked at Callan. "Tuesday was when Otis Fenn used to come to town," she said. "Every week. He'd stop at the bakery first, then the church. His wife used to make the bread for the Tuesday fellowship for 20 years. He kept the habit after she was gone." She paused. Otis passed in March. He'd been at the care centre over in Harwick since last January. Colin stood very still. "The cat started coming," Hazel said, "about 6 weeks after Otis went to the care centre. The cat was not waiting for something to come. He had been marking time. He had been travelling the route, the bakery, the church, the road home, at the same hour, in the same direction, that the person who loved him had travelled it. Not looking for him, tracing the shape of him in the world he had moved through." Callan looked down at Marlo. Marlo was looking at the road that ran south out of Main Street. At 4:17 in the afternoon, the light had taken on the flat, golden quality of Vermont October late in the day. The oak leaves on the green moved in the low wind. He looked at the road, what Callan said, at the edge of the fair, in a voice low enough that only Elowen, standing nearby, could hear. "He's been keeping the schedule." "Yes," Elowen said. "He was doing it before I found him." "Yes," she said again. Colin looked at the cat, at the road, at the light. Something happened in his face that stayed this time, did not pull back, did not close, and Elowen, who had spent 31 years reading faces that were trying not to be read, saw it clearly and said nothing. She had learned, over the years, that the most important moments did not need commentary. He had been careful all the way home not to think too far ahead. Marlo rode in the passenger seat without the carrier. This had happened gradually, without decision, the carrier eventually migrating to the back of the truck and the cat migrating to the seat, which was where Callan found him when he opened the door, and which he had decided, after the carrier incident, was not worth contesting. The cat sat upright, looking out the windshield at the dark county road, unreeling in the headlights, with the same undisturbed attention he gave to everything. Callan drove. He had 3 days left on the hold. He would call Tamsin in the morning. He would figure out the paperwork. He would. He had not yet finished the thought when he noticed the truck door. He had not latched it. Not the passenger door. His door, the driver's side, which he always latched, which had been latching reliably for 9 years. In the cold and the distraction of leaving the fair, he had pulled it to, but not caught the mechanism. The door had drifted open a 1/4 inch in the first curve. The cold came in. Marlo turned from the windshield and looked at the door. Then at Callan. Then he reached forward, one slow, deliberate extension of his right front paw, and placed it on the door panel. Not on the handle, on the panel, near the latch. He held it there. The door did not drift further. Callan held the wheel with both hands in the dark and felt something move through him that he did not have a word for. That was not grief and not gratitude, and was perhaps the thing that lives between them when it has been held in suspension for long enough. He drove. The cat's paw stayed on the door until Callan reached the driveway. He called Tamsin the next morning. "I'm keeping him," he said. There was a pause on Tamsin's end that was not surprise. It was the pause of a person who is careful not to be seen to have known something before being told. "I'll send the paperwork," she said. He put the phone down. Marlo was on the window seat in the morning light. Callan stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the hallway. He did not open the door. Not yet, but he stood there longer than he had stood there in 4 years. And Marlo, from the window seat, watched him the way he watched everything, with the complete, unhurried attention of something that had arrived where it intended to be and was in no rush whatsoever. November came into Calder's Crossing the way it always did, not dramatically, not with the sudden violence of a northern storm, but with the specific, methodical withdrawal of warmth that Vermonters recognized as the season's actual character. The maples were bare by the first week. The light dropped at 4 in the afternoon with a finality that, in the years Callan had been here, he had come to accept without pleasure or resentment, the way he accepted most things he could not change, with the acknowledgement that this was simply the condition. He had fixed the mudroom latch properly after the 3rd time Marlo had found his way through it. He had purchased a bag of cedar chips for the corner of the garage where the cat slept during work hours, positioned away from the equipment and out of drafts, a concession he had made without ceremony on a Tuesday morning when he walked in and found Marlo on a folded moving blanket that had been stiff with cold. He had bought the cedar chips at Henrikson's, which carried them for small animal bedding, and he had not said anything when Burl Henrikson at the register glanced at the bag and then at Callan with the contained, deliberate blankness of a man making a private note. Small towns kept their own accounts. Callan was aware of this. He had not spent 11 years in Calder's Crossing without understanding how the ledger worked. He had been, all that time, in a column marked something like, "Quiet, capable, not your business." He had maintained that column with intention. The cat had not, in any dramatic or obvious way, removed him from it. But he was aware, in the way you are aware of a gradual shift in light, that the column was being quietly reclassified by people who watched such things. Elowen Price, for instance, had begun waving when she saw him from across the street, which was not something she had done before. He had begun, in the last week, waving back, which was not something he had done before either. He was not certain who had started it or when, only that it was happening. He told himself it was a normal exchange between neighbors. It was the closest he came, that November, to admitting that something had changed. And what the cat did the first 2 weeks of November established a nighttime pattern that Callan did not interfere with. Marlo began the evening on the window seat. At 9 o'clock, Callan had checked, and it was 9 o'clock reliably, in the way everything about this animal was reliable. He rose and walked the length of the house, from the front room through the kitchen and down the hall to the closed door, where he sat for 20 minutes. Then he returned to the window seat. Then, somewhere between 10 and 11, he moved to the foot of Callan's bed. This was the pattern. Callan had stopped noting it consciously. He simply knew it, the way you know the sound of your own house in the dark, absorbing it into the background of what was normal. What the cat did, the night of the 8th of November, did not return to the window seat after the hallway, stayed at the door for 40 minutes, then lay down in front of it, his full length pressed against the base of the door, his chin on his front paws, and slept there. Callan found him at 6 in the morning, still there. He stood in the hallway, looking at the grey shape of the cat against the white door in the thin, early light, and something in him did what things do when they have been held against pressure for a long time. It shifted, not broke, shifted. The way ice shifts in early thaw, still there, still cold, but no longer entirely rigid. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he took his coffee and walked to the end of the hall and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, beside the closed door. Marlo raised his head, looked at Callan beside him, then set his chin back on his paws. They sat there together in the morning light for 20 minutes without moving. Nothing was said. Nothing was decided. No door was opened. But Callan did not get up until he had finished the coffee, And when he did, he took the mug back to the kitchen slowly, without the usual precise efficiency he brought to the small transactions of his morning, and he stood at the kitchen window and looked at the bare trees at the edge of the lot and thought about what was behind that door and let himself think about it, which was different from the 4 years of not thinking about it in the same place. It was not yet time. But it was closer than it had been. What Elaine saw, the second week of November, the truck in the driveway at 6:15 on a Saturday, which was not a workday. She saw Callan come out of the house in his work jacket and cross to the truck and open the passenger door, and the cat jump in and the truck back out and head north on the county road. She saw it return at 11. She saw Callan unload 2 bags from the truck, one from the feed store, one from a shop she didn't recognize, and carry them inside. She had been watching long enough to know what it looked like when a person was furnishing a life they had not planned on. She crossed the street on Sunday. He opened the door. The cat was on the window seat behind him, in the thin November light. "I want to ask you something," she said. He waited. "Marlo," she said. "The bakery, the church, the road. Do you know who Otis Fenn's wife was?" "Hazel mentioned a wife," he said. "Made bread for the fellowship." "Her name was June Fenn," Elaine said. "She died 12 years ago. Otis never really—" She paused, choosing her words in the way she had always chosen them for the most important sentences. "He never really reorganized. He kept every routine they had shared. The bakery on Tuesdays, the church. The road home at 4:15. She looked at Callan steadily. Marlo grew up in that pattern. It was the whole shape of his life. Colin said nothing. "I think," Elaine said carefully, "that some creatures learn grief the way they learn roots. Marlo doesn't know that Otis is gone. He knows the root is broken. He knows the person doesn't come anymore. He does the only thing he knows how to do with that." "He keeps the schedule," Callan said. "He keeps the schedule," she agreed. A long pause. The wind moved the bare oak at the corner of the lot. A single leaf, overlooked by November, let go and crossed the road. "You do that too," Elaine said quietly. She said it without accusation, without gentleness either. She said it the way she had said the most important things to 4th graders for 31 years, as a fact, plain, spoken to someone she trusted to be able to hear it. Callan looked at her for a moment. Then he looked past her at the bare trees. "I'll think about it," he said. She nodded. She turned and walked back across the street, and she did not look back because she knew when a moment needed to be left alone to do its work. What the cat did, the night of the 14th of November, something he had not done before. Callan had come home at 7, later than usual, a carburetor job that had run past dark, the kind of work that required full attention and rewarded it with the specific quiet satisfaction of a thing functioning correctly again. He ate standing at the kitchen counter, which was his habit when he was tired. He washed the plate. He turned off the kitchen light. He was in the hallway, heading to the bedroom, when he heard it. A sound from behind the closed door. Not a knocking. Not a structural sound, the particular sound of a loose object settling, something that had been balanced, finding its way to a different position, the dry whisper of cardboard or cloth. He stood in the hallway. Marlo, at the door, had not made the sound. Marlo was sitting in his position with his paw against the wood, as he did each evening. Still, external, present. The sound came again, quieter this time, then nothing. Callan put his hand on the knob. He stood there with his hand on the brass knob and the small scratch along the top of it that he had never polished out and that he could feel now under his thumb, the specific depth and width of it, and he thought, it is boxes settling. It is wood contracting in the cold. It is nothing. He thought, it has been 4 years. He thought, nothing in that room is waiting for you to come back. He turned the knob. The door opened. It was not locked. It had never been locked, only kept. He pushed it slowly and it swung inward, and the smell came first. Cedar and old paper and something faintly floral that he had not smelled in 4 years, which was the specific smell of the woman who had kept her books stacked in the order she'd read them and kept a small sachet of dried lavender in the top drawer of the desk. He did not go in. He stood in the doorway with the door open and let the smell be what it was. Marlo stood up. He walked through the doorway and into the room, not rushing, not exploring, simply entering, the way he entered any room he had decided was accessible. He crossed to the far wall where the boxes were stacked and sat down in front of them and looked back at Callan in the doorway. Colin looked at the room. There was a window on the south wall, which he had not looked at in 4 years, and through it the November dark was complete. No light on that side of the house, nothing but the cold distance of the yard and the bare trees at its edge. The boxes were stacked neatly in 2 rows, the way he had left them. The desk was clear. The chair he had bought her, the one with the high back and the armrests she had always said were the right height for reading, was still where he had placed it, angled slightly toward the window. He looked at the chair for a long time. Then he stepped back into the hallway and pulled the door to, not fully closed, not latched, just resting. Not yet, but open. What the cat did, came out of the room, sat beside Callan's feet in the hallway, did not return to the door that night. He had done what he had come to do. He went to the window seat. The night it went wrong was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of November, when the temperature dropped 14 degrees between dinner and midnight, and a front moved through from the northwest, without the warning the radio had been promising for 3 days. Callan had banked the garage heater before dark and secured the roll-up door and done the things he did at the end of every working day. He had not checked the mudroom door of the house. He had fixed the latch. He knew this. But the front that came through that night was the kind that came at angles, and the angle of the wind caught the mudroom door at the specific degree that lifted the latch mechanism rather than pressing it flat, and sometime between 10 at night and 1 in the morning, the door drifted open. The temperature outside was 19 degrees. He woke at 1:15 with the cold of a draft he could not immediately locate. He lay still for a moment, calibrating. Vermont houses in November had drafts. This was known. This was managed. But this was different. This was a cross draft, the specific moving cold of an open door, rather than a leaking window. He got up. The mudroom door was open. The yard was dark. The cold came in through it steadily. He looked at the window seat. Empty. He looked at the foot of his bed. Empty. He walked through the house quickly. Kitchen, front room, hallway. He checked the door at the end of the hall, which was still resting, as he had left it, at an inch ajar. He looked in. No cat. He put on his jacket and his boots and went outside. The cold had a quality particular to Vermont in the 3rd week of November, not the theatrical cold of January, but something more patient and more insidious, the cold of a season that has decided and is no longer making arguments about it. The yard was dark. The trees were black shapes against a sky with no moon. Colin stood on the back step and called. Marlo. He had not called for the cat before. He had said the name inside, low and incidental, in the course of daily speech, the name as identifier, not as summons. This was different. This was his voice, going out into the dark yard at 1 in the morning, looking for something that should be inside. He called again. Nothing. He walked the yard with a flashlight. He checked the garage. The side door had been latched and remained so, but he went in anyway and swept the flashlight through the interior. Empty. He checked under the workbench and behind the stacked tires and in the corner with the cedar chips. Nothing. He stood in the dark garage and let himself feel what he was feeling, which was a specific, targeted fear that he recognized from another context entirely and had spent 4 years avoiding by not accumulating anything that could generate it. He stood with it. He did not push it back. He went back out. He knocked on Eloan's door at 1:45 in the morning. He stood on her porch in the cold and knocked and told himself this was a practical measure, that she lived across the street and had seen the cat come and go and might have seen something, that it was a reasonable knock to make at a reasonable hour, and he was aware that all of this was accurate and that none of it was the actual reason he was standing on her porch. She answered in her wool robe and her reading glasses, which meant she had been awake. She looked at him. She looked at the dark behind him. He's gone, Callan said. She got her coat. They searched in a pattern that Eloan organized with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had spent 31 years managing the logistical complexity of 24 fourth graders simultaneously. She took the north and east side of the block. She sent Callan south toward the garage and west toward the green. She had a flashlight of her own, the practical kind. She did not ask unnecessary questions. Leorin Cade, who lived 3 houses down and kept the kind of schedule that put him outside at odd hours, saw the flashlights at 2 in the morning and came out in his coveralls to ask what was happening. He was a large, quiet man in his 40s who worked at his own small repair shop 2 blocks from Callan's garage, and who had, in the course of 11 years of parallel mechanical trades in a small town, developed the kind of relationship with Callan that consisted almost entirely of nods and the occasional exchange of parts. No friendship, no distance either. The specific middle thing of men who understand each other's work. Callan told him the cat was missing. Leorin said, "There's an old garage on Pell Road, East Edge, place where Otis Fenn used to keep his truck before the care centre. I've seen the cat over there before, a couple of times." Callan looked at him. "Old grey cat, right?" Leorin said. "Sits beside the roll-up, same as he does at your place." Callan turned east. What the cat had done, sometime between 10 and 1, gone out through the drifted mudroom door, crossed the yard, moved through the gap in the south fence, and travelled east along the route he had always known, the route that was not Callan's route, or any recent route, but the original one, the one that had been laid down before Callan, or the lot, or the oil drum, the route that belonged to the person who had set the schedule in the first place. He had gone back to where he had started, not because he was lost, because he knew the way. So, the old garage on Pell Road was a low building of weathered board, unlocked. There was nothing in it anymore that required locking, with a sliding door that had been left open 3 inches for ventilation, which was, Callan saw immediately, enough for a cat. He pushed the door, and it moved reluctantly on its track, and he brought the flashlight in. The interior smelled of old oil and dry wood, and the coal that had been gathering in it all night. There was an empty bay where a truck had once been parked, and along the far wall a shelf unit with nothing on it, and on the floor in front of the shelf a folded piece of flannel that had been there long enough to have taken on the shape and smell of habitual use. Marlo was on the flannel, not curled, not distressed, lying with his chin on his front paws in the way he lay when he had no particular objection to the world as it was currently presenting itself. He was cold. Callan could see that in the tight, conserving posture, the slight flattening of the fur, but not in danger. He was managing. He looked at Callan. He did not move toward him. He did not move away. He looked at Callan the way he had looked at him across the shelter counter the first time, full, patient, measuring. The look of something that is assessing whether the situation has changed. Callan crossed the garage and crouched down on the cold concrete in front of the flannel. He put his hand down, palm up, at cat height, the way people do when they are trying to let an animal make the choice. Marlo looked at the hand. He looked at Callan's face. Something in the quality of that look, the completeness of it, the absolute absence of performance, undid something in Callan that had been tied since before he could remember the tying. It was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the particular, quiet dissolution of something that has been held in tension for so long that the body has forgotten what release feels like, and then, without warning, remembers. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried, or rather, he had spent 4 years ensuring he did not have occasion to, and the habit had held. But something went out of him, there on the cold concrete floor of Otis Fenn's old garage that he had been carrying since the November 4 years ago when he had packed boxes into a room and closed the door. Marlo stepped forward. He put both front paws on Callan's palm, a weight so specific and so small that it was almost nothing and was entirely something, and then stepped off and walked to Callan's side and sat there. Elowen, in the doorway, watched all of this. She did not say anything. She had 31 years of knowing when to say nothing. They walked home in the dark, the 3 of them, Elowen with her flashlight, Callan with the cat in his arms, because the temperature was 19 degrees and the walk was 6 blocks, and he was not interested in the cat choosing his own pace on this particular evening. Marlo accepted this with the composed tolerance of a creature who understood that some things were non-negotiable and had decided, a long time ago, to pick his contests carefully. Leorin Cade, passing in his truck on the way back from the West End, where he had been checking the green, saw them on Pell Road and slowed. He looked at the 3 of them. He looked at the cat in Callan's arms. He nodded. Callan nodded back. The truck moved on. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. Not all at once, not dramatically. The way things change when someone has finally made a decision and is living forward from it rather than backward from something else. The door at the end of the hallway was opened one morning in the first week of December, a Tuesday, which was not the day Callan had intended, if he had intended a day at all, which he hadn't. He was simply walking past it, and he opened it, the way you open a door that has been closed for too long and has begun to exist less as a barrier and more as an oversight. He pushed it wide and let the December light come in from the south window. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went and made coffee and came back and stood there some more with the mug in his hand. Marlo walked in ahead of him, as though this were simply the next room, as though there had never been a question about it. Imuaoi. The room was cleaned over the course of several days, not emptied, not erased. The boxes were opened, and the objects inside were returned to their proper places with the care of a person who knows the difference between keeping and holding on. The books were shelved in the order they had been in, because that was the right order. The desk was cleared, and the chair was angled toward the window, where the south light came through in the afternoon, at precisely the hour when reading was best. The lavender sachet found in the top drawer was left in the top drawer. He did not throw it away. He was not ready for everything. But he was ready for this. Eowyn visited on the second Saturday of December, when the first real snow of the season had come down overnight and was still on the ground, particular and quiet, the kind of snow that Calder's Crossing wore well. She brought nothing with her. She knocked, and he let her in and made coffee, which was the extent of his hospitality and which she accepted without requiring more. She sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from her. Marlo was on the window seat in the front room, visible through the doorway, doing what he did in the morning light. They talked in the way of people who have recently established the right to talk to each other, carefully at first, then with more ease, about small things, the snow, the fair, the winter schedule at the garage. Eowyn mentioned that her daughter was coming from Portland for Christmas. Callan said that was good. He meant it. It came out simply, without the careful neutrality he usually applied to other people's lives, and Eowyn noted this and said nothing about it, which was itself a form of saying something. "The room," she said after a while. He looked at her. "I saw the light in the window," she said. "South window. It was dark in there for a long time." 4 years, he said. She nodded. She looked at her coffee. Then she said, "What was her name?" "Dina," he said. He said it simply, without the careful withholding he had kept around it for 4 years, and the word sat between them on the kitchen table with all its weight and all its specific gravity, and neither of them moved around it, and after a moment it was simply a name. His wife's name, spoken in his kitchen, real and present, and belonging to the room. She would have loved this cat, he said. It was the first time he had thought about Dina and Marlo in the same sentence, and the thinking of it did not hurt in the way he had always assumed such thoughts would hurt. It felt instead like something beginning, not something ending that had been extended, but something beginning. "He's very easy to love," Eowyn said. "He's not easy," Callan said. "He's clear." She looked at him. "He's always been clear," he said. "I just wasn't." Eowyn's granddaughter came with Eowyn's daughter for Christmas, a girl of 8 named Tess, who had her grandmother's attentiveness and her mother's directness, and who arrived in Calder's Crossing with the particular energy of a child encountering a new place and intending to understand it thoroughly. She saw Marlo on the first morning through Eowyn's kitchen window and asked, with the precision of someone who already knew the answer, "Whose cat is that?" "The man across the street," Eowyn said. "Can I meet him?" "You'll have to ask," Eowyn said. Tess thought about this for 1 second. Then she went across the street and knocked on Callan's door, which Callan answered with the expression of a man who was not expecting a child. She introduced herself. She asked if she could draw the cat. He said she could. She came back the next morning with a sketchbook and sat on the porch step in her coat, and Marlo sat in the doorway, which Callan left open enough that the cat could choose, and she drew him in the December light with the earnest, absorbed concentration of a person who takes the thing in front of her seriously. Callan, inside, was aware of the child on his porch, the way he had been aware of the cat in the early days, as a presence at the edge of attention, not intrusive, simply there. After a while, he brought 2 mugs of hot cider to the door and handed one down to her, and she took it and said, "Thank you," without looking up from the drawing, which was, he found, the right response. He sat on the top step with his own cider and looked at the snow on the county road and let the morning be what it was. CTA, before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. These stories exist because of this community, because of you. And right now, YouTube has denied our monetization, which means the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever made you feel something, if they've brought you comfort, joy, or just a moment of peace, consider making a small donation. Even the minimum makes a huge difference to us. The link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you for being here. End CTA. On an afternoon in late January, the coldest week of a cold winter, Callan drove to Harwick. He had not planned to go. He had been making a list at the kitchen table, parts he needed, an order he had been putting off, and then he had closed the notebook, gotten his jacket, and called to Marlo, who came from the window seat with the unhurried certainty of an animal that has not been surprised in a long time. He drove the 9 miles east with the cat in the passenger seat and parked in front of the care centre on Route 9, which was a low brick building with a clean front walk and window boxes that held something dormant and optimistic against the January cold. He sat in the truck for a moment, then he went in. He asked at the front desk for Otis Fenn. He gave his own name. He said he had Otis Fenn's cat. The woman at the desk, young, steady-eyed, experienced in the management of emotionally complex situations, looked at him. Then she looked at the carrier he was holding, where Marlo sat, looking out through the mesh with his pale amber eyes. "Mr. Fenn has limited visitors," she said. "He has good days and difficult days." "I understand," Callan said. She made a call. She waited. She looked at him again and at the carrier. Then she said, 10 minutes. Otis Fenn was 83 years old and small in the way that people become small when the body begins to recede toward its essential architecture. He was sitting in a chair by the window that looked, Callan noted immediately, east, toward the road that led back toward Calder's Crossing. He had a blanket across his lap, and his hands rested on top of it with the still, patient quality of hands that have nothing left to do and have made their peace with that. He looked at Callan when the door opened. Then he looked at the carrier. Callan set the carrier on the floor and opened the door. Marlo stepped out. He took one step too and stopped. He looked at the man in the chair. The man in the chair looked at the cat. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Otis Fenn reached one hand down from the arm of his chair, slowly, with the deliberate care of someone whose movements require intention. His hand, open, descended toward the cat. Marlo walked forward. He put both front paws on the man's slippered foot, the way he had put his paws on Callan's palm in the cold garage. That same specific, deliberate placement, that same quality of weight that was both nothing and everything. He looked up at Otis. Otis Fenn made a sound that was not a word. His hand found the top of Marlo's head and stayed there. Callan stood near the door and watched this and felt nothing that needed to be named or managed. He simply stood and let it be what it was, an old man and a grey cat in a January room, completing something that had been left incomplete. After a while, Otis looked up at Callan. "He's all right?" His voice was thin but clear. "He's all right," Callan said. Otis looked back at the cat. His thumb moved slowly along the line of Marlo's ear, back and forth, a motion so practiced and so automatic that it spoke of years of repetition, of 10,000 identical movements that had made a groove in the habit of his hands. "He used to wait for me," Otis said. "At the door." "He still does," Callan said. Otis looked at him. "Just at a different door," Callan said. The old man's hand did not stop moving. The cat did not move. Outside the window, the January road ran east toward Calder's Crossing in the flat, cold light. 10 minutes passed, and then a few more. Then Callan picked up the carrier and held the door open, and Marlo stepped back, looked once at Otis Fenn, and walked out. He drove home through the winter afternoon with the cat in the passenger seat and the particular quality of silence that is not empty, but full of something settled, something that has found its place after a long time of being displaced. He did not put the radio on. He drove through Harwick and onto the county road, and the road ran west through the bare January trees, with the last of the afternoon light running long and cold across the snow. Marlo sat on the seat and looked at the road ahead. At 4:15, Callan felt rather than checked the time. Beside him, Marlo's attention shifted, that familiar quality of held alertness, that orienting towards something that the hour carried. He reached forward, one slow extension of his right paw, the way he had done it on the driver's door in the October dark. He placed it on the center console between them. He held it there. Callan looked at the paw on the console. He looked at the road. He put his own hand down, alongside the cat's, not covering it, just there. Two hands and the January road and 4:15 in the afternoon, the hour that had meant something once and had been grief and was now, in the very slow way of such transformations, beginning to mean something else. He drove. Spring came to Calder's Crossing in the way Vermont spring comes, reluctantly, with setbacks, with the kind of cold that returns in April as if testing whether you meant it. The mud season was long and serious. The road to the garage held puddles until late March. The oak at the corner of the lot put out its first green with a conservatism that suggested it had not forgotten what the last 6 months had been. Marlo, unconcerned by the delay, moved between his positions with the same unhurried rotation. The cedar chips in the garage, the south window seat, the foot of the bed, the open door of the room at the end of the hall. He had taken to sitting in the chair that was angled toward the window, the chair that Callan had returned to its proper position, angled toward the afternoon light. He sat in it with the composed, unapologetic authority of a cat that has decided a chair is a chair and the question of ownership is not worth discussing. Colin did not move him. The morning Elowen brought Tess back for the spring visit. The girl had been asking since January, according to Elowen, about the cat and about whether she could show him her drawings. Was a Saturday in late April when the air smelled of mud and cold water, and somewhere below that, the first green things pressing up through the dark ground. Tess arrived at Callan's door with her sketchbook and 3 drawings she had made at home in Portland, working from memory. Marlo on the step, Marlo in the window, Marlo in a posture she had observed and Callan had not, which was the cat sitting at the end of the hall with one paw against a closed door. She handed the drawings to Callan. He looked at them for a long time. "That one's accurate," he said, pointing to the 3rd drawing. "I know," she said. "He does it in a way that looks like he's listening." Colin looked at the drawing again. He was aware of Elowen at his elbow, looking at it with him. "Yes," he said, "he does." He put the drawings on the desk in the room at the end of the hall, which was open. He propped them against the books in the afternoon light, where they would be visible from the chair. On a morning in May, Callan sat in his truck in the garage lot before starting work. Engine off. The morning was mild and grey, the overcast that Vermont wore in May before the sun decided to commit, and the lot held the smell of wet gravel and new leaves from the oak at the corner, which had, finally, put out its full green. The passenger door opened. Marlo jumped up and settled into the seat with the efficient, complete motion of something that has done this many times and expects to do it many more. He arranged himself, paws tucked under, tail around front feet, attention directed at the windshield. Colin looked at him. He thought about the carrier in the parking lot, open, empty. The shelter room going quiet, a child's voice saying, "That's not a cat that wants to leave." An old man's hand on grey fur in a January room. A door that had been closed for 4 years opening onto south light and the smell of lavender. He thought, "I tried." He put the key in. The engine turned over. The lot opened ahead of them, the gravel and the oil drum and the county road beyond it, running south in the May morning light. Marlo reached forward and placed his paw on the key. Just like before, Colin left his hand where it was. He did not pull away. He did not start the engine. He stayed. Outside, a bird landed in the oak tree, and then another, and the leaves moved in the morning air, and Marlo watched them through the windshield with the still, complete attention of something that has no particular place it needs to be, because it is already where it chose.